based on his analysis of all of the data, we don't have that much, okay, but based on his analysis of all of the data of Egyptian skeletons, he says, one, they cluster very well with Africans to the south. They cluster very well in some instances with what are called Neolithic Saharans, and in some instances the skeletal evidence is pointing toward them clustering with Central African populations. This is his analysis of this evidence. So even on this scale, you know, what Egyptologists, when they write very forcefully like this, you know, and very assertively like this, and talking about the foundation of Egyptian civilization, they're giving you a very skewed picture of really what's going on, because you don't really have a full picture of all of the types of evidence and the debate that's going into this question. You know, so when someone like Zahi Hawass, you know, of the Egyptian antiquities in Egypt with King Tut and all of this other stuff, you know, that you'd probably be aware of, but when he comes out and just says bombastically, you know, Egypt was not an African civilization, Egypt was not black, it wasn't African, etc. When he makes these forceful tones, well, he's trying to get paid. That's essentially what that boils down to. He stands outside of any really rigorous debate, even inside Egyptology. You know, even. You know, there are many people that would not get up on a stage and say what he said. You know, so he can't say completely that they're not African. You just can't get up anywhere and say that. You have to deal with this question. But he doesn't have to deal with it because he's over the Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt, and he's making the money off of this tour. This is another one. Ian Shaw was Ala Yoyot and Pascal Vernou. But I'll skip this one. But it's essentially saying the same thing as Yoyot and Pascal Vernou. This is Robert Morcott, who you may know his book called Black Pharaohs, which discusses Nubia in 2005. But Yoyot, in his book, says that the ancient Egyptians were not white in any European sense, nor were they Caucasian. And you have all of these types. You can find all of these types of assertions in many of these works. It is impossible to make a generalization about the appearance of a single population over a period of 5,000 years, but we can say that the earliest population of ancient Egypt included African people from the Upper Nile, African people from the regions of the Sahara and modern Libya, and smaller numbers of people who had come from southwestern Asia and perhaps the Arabian Peninsula. So you see all, you know, sorts of different types of interpretations of the foundation of Egyptian civilization, but this one I want to especially highlight for you. This is Christopher Ehret. He wrote a book called The Civilizations of Africa, A History to 1800. Christopher Ehret is a professor of linguistics and history at UCLA. He's had some debates and some discussions with Theophilo Benga. If you ask me some questions, I'll give you more specifics. But in this book, when you get this book, it's a teaching book. Okay, it's meant for History of Africa courses. But he has stood outside now. Based on his expertise is linguistic data. And based on that linguistic data, this is his conclusion. Over the long run of northeastern African history, what emerges most strongly is the extent to which ancient Egypt's culture grew from sub-Saharan African roots. The earliest foundations of the culture that was to evolve into that of dynastic Egypt were laid, as we have already discovered, by Afrosan. This is his new kind of linguistic terminology that's taking the place of Afro-Asiatic. By Afrosan immigrants from the general direction of the southern Red Sea Hills, who arrived probably well before 10,000 BCE. The new inhabitants brought with them a language directly ancestral to ancient Egyptian. They introduce a new religion. Its central belief in the efficacy of clan deities explains the traceability of the ancient Egyptian gods to different particular Egyptian localities. Originally, they were the deities of the local communities whose members in still earlier time had belonged to a clan or a group of related clans. What I am saying here to you and what I'm suggesting to you is that these recent efforts by Joseph Atuori, by Shamarka Keita, who was African American, by Christopher Ehret, all of these, the disagreements with Sheikh Anta Diop are in terms of process, not in terms of conclusion. Okay? Meaning that they take the position that, you know, and it's not necessarily mutually it's not necessarily mutually exclusive. These scholars take the position that there was probably a pre-existent deep cultural substratum that united all of these African populations. Perhaps this stretched back to 15,000, 20,000 BC, and you see this unity radiating out to different parts of Africa. Their critique of Cheikh Anta Diop is that Cheikh Anta Diop attempted to find like a geographical departure point for this unity. Okay, so in the Nile Valley, okay, which is what Cheikh Anta Diop attempted to do. So their point is that they don't disagree that the unity exists. They don't disagree that the unity is there. They don't disagree that we shouldn't compare Egypt to other African civilizations. They only disagree about the process. Okay, and what I want to say is that those things aren't mutually exclusive, meaning that it could be both a deep cultural unity that is very deep in terms of time, and it could also be Cheikh Anta Diop in terms of diffusion based on invasions, etc. It could be both things going on at the same time. And this is Joseph Ataori and his question, and I'm going to end on this one. He says, the inevitable question arises, how has it come about that Neolithic Saharan civilizations, ancient Egypt, and modern black African civilizations share cultural features? The parallels have traditionally been explained by diffusion, as much in the direction of Egypt to the Sahara, black Africa, as in the direction of black Africa, Sahara to Egypt. Today, however, essentially autochthonous explanations are preferred based on what we call the substratum theory, whereby all of the civilizations in question, even in their differences and peculiarities, share a common cultural substratum, as occurs in the northern world amongst Indo-European civilizations. This is a white Egyptologist, saying this. And what people don't see when people castigate the work of Cheikh Anta Diop, what I want to conclude on is that Cheikh Anta Diop has initiated a revolution in terms of paradigms. His opposition has had to confront his work, and even it has shifted some Egyptologists in small quarters, but important quarters, that are, the whole school of Spanish Egyptology in Barcelona, Spain, it basically takes the thesis that Egypt is an African civilization. And so they don't even look at the Near East for comparisons. They don't even look at the Mediterranean for comparisons. Their whole work is in Africa. So Cheikh Anta Diop initiated a very wide-reaching paradigm-shifting revolution on the question of the foundation of Egyptian civilization. And we're not aware of that because we're not aware of the total body of work in Egyptology, and we continue to exist in these arguments. When people give us arguments, debating this question, they are not debating with a full deck of information even. And what we need to do is to put our information out there, to put our synthesis of the information out there also. And what Cheikh Anta Diop wanted was research teams. This work couldn't be done by one person alone. And so there are many extensive bibliographies on the Sudan, on Egypt, on the prehistory, etc. In the future, well, right now, we need complex research teams that have different areas of emphasis that are able to engage this whole question on a very elaborate level. Because Cheikh Anta Diop is right. There are many archaeological excavation reports that come out every year in Egyptology, and they don't put the puzzle together. They never put the puzzle together. There are just these minute pieces that are disconnected. Okay, but if I put the puzzle together, and I can tell you how to put it together because I see the pieces all the time when I'm reading their work. So I look at people like Rene Friedman, who is in Minnesota, who is doing work on Hierakonpolis, and in her work, you'd be amazed that she has found all of this information that connects Egypt to Ethiopia in terms of trade, in terms of styles, in terms of hair, etc. And it doesn't get played up. And it's affirming our thesis of the African foundation of Egyptian civilization, but people, especially our opposition, are not willing to see that. And of course, it is up to us to bring out this information, to highlight what's there, and to create our own synthesis of this information. People, really haven't heard about this new type of scholarship that is really strengthening the position of Cheikh Anta Diop. It really is. So I will end there, and I thank you very much to listening to this presentation. Hopefully it wasn't too technical for you, but I'll take questions now. Thank you very much for having me.
There's about 10 to 15 minutes to take query for Dr. Beatty.
Questions? And also, this is another journal that comes out of the Caribbean, in Martinique, Cahiers Caribbean d'Egyptology. These are other African scholars. There are two journals. There's Ankh in Paris that is circulating around, and there is this journal that comes out of Martinique. And all of these scholars, most of them are African scholars dealing with this question, and on a very technical level. So there are teams, there are people that are doing this type of work. Right.
Is the languages in French?
Yes, this one in the Ankh journal, primarily I write the articles in English for them. Yeah, but it's mainly in French. But for some, you can kind of get a GIST translation on different programs. You can get a GIST translation, but without you need to have some background in Egyptian hieroglyphs to be able to get the essence of a lot of it. Go ahead. How many schools are participating in what? Oh, that's a good question. There are not a lot of centers for Egyptology in the United States, but certainly there are ones that have major excavation teams. University of Pennsylvania, their Department of Anthropology and Archaeology, they always have a major research team. The Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago, they always have a major team. Brown University to a lesser extent. Yale University, where William Kelly Simpson is at. University of Michigan. University of California at Berkeley. UCLA to a lesser extent. Down in Texas, not necessarily Egypt as such, but at SMU, Southern Methodist University, they have an excavation team that goes to Nubia, Sudan a lot. They do work there. So pretty much outside of those are pretty much the major teams in the United States. Yeah. But there are many teams in the world. We don't even have, that's one thing. We don't really have our own team. There are at least probably 100 teams in Egypt doing field work, field research, from different countries, subsidized not just by universities, sometimes subsidized by governments.
So what's the biggest group right now? This particular area?
That's a good question. It's a lot of different groups. Rene Friedman, who is kind of a free agent. She's doing a lot of great work in Hierakonpolis in Upper Egypt, and a lot of stuff that she's finding is, so for example, I'll give you small examples. The substance that the Egyptians use, the inlaid eyes that you see, the very beautiful inlaid eyes in the coffins that you see, they make the eyes look lifelike, that make like you're looking at a person. Well, she did a study on that, and she asked early on, she's like, well, where did this come from? Where does this obsidian come from? There are like many, there are a few places that you can get this material substance in Egypt, but, she said in the earliest part of Egyptian civilization, their obsidian for that type of material was coming from Ethiopia, and could only come from Ethiopia. So you see right there is a, and so, you just compare it, to other places. So on that basis, she said, there had to be a very elaborate, is what Dr. Clark called a cultural highway. There's a very elaborate cultural highway that links these civilizations.
There's actually an axe on this past summer, and I saw a lot of that axe. Little kids would be selling it.
Oh, the obsidian?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The question I had was with Theophile Inga, what were some of the, arguments he was, linguistical arguments he was getting with the other researchers?
This is Theophile Inga in in 1997, Theophil Obenga attended a major conference of linguists in Spain. This was a conference where Christopher Ehret was at. Many of them were at. Obenga likes to go. It's just like the Cairo conference. He likes to go to major conferences that are going to have meaning, you know, where proceedings are going to be published, where he can meet all of the big players and to make his thesis. Well, he went there, he gave his paper. The conference said that they were going to publish all of the proceedings, all of the papers from the conference. They didn't publish Obenga's paper. But Obenga's, they promised him that. Okay, and going, they didn't publish his paper. But Obenga, you know, presented his thesis. And, you know, Christopher Ehret, they brought Christopher Ehret actually to dismantle Obenga. You know, ironically, although they agree on many, you know, different aspects. But the point is that Ehret's thesis is that this is not like an Afro-Asiatic linguistic family. He creates a different term, Afrosan, because he feels that the family originates in Ethiopia. A language family originates in Ethiopia, and it's the principle in linguistics and in biological, you know, kind of evolution. It's the principle of greatest diversity and least moves. Okay, so you know it kind of filters out and radiates out, you know, from Ethiopia all the way up north and into Asia. His theory is based on that. Cheikh Anta Diop and Obenga, who is really the linguist. Okay, Cheikh Anta Diop, in his work, Cheikh Anta Diop had licenses in, you know, philosophy and sociology and aesthetics, you know, and he had 2 degrees in general and applied chemistry, etc. But his work in terms of linguistics, Cheikh Anta Diop did that on the side. Okay, Obenga is the linguist. Okay, he's the one who has the systematic training in that area in terms of his educational background. This is what you see in his work. Obenga's thesis is that these language families cannot capture the full unity of what is going on the African continent. So Obenga, just like Cheikh Anta Diop, Obenga says, when I go to my own language, you know, and I'm seeing series of pronouns that are the same, and I'm seeing terms that are the same, like basic terms. Obenga asks a question, what is the non-accidental relationship between these languages? And so he looks, Obenga's method is to look at basic terms. What do you call the sun? What do you call the moon? What do you call the arm? What do you call the eye? What do you call the face? Basic terms that are so deep, you know, that they can't possibly be borrowings. Okay? That they can't possibly be borrowings. And on that basis, Obenga makes the assessment. He compares Egypt to other African language, and he just goes down and say, these terms are the same. You know, I can find similar terms in Central Africa, you know, that are basically the same, and I can find the same thing in West Africa. So if you have patterns like that that are occurring in language, his question is, how do you interpret that? You know, now Ehret subsequently, and Obenga shifted Ehret actually in the presentation, which they will never say. But Ehret subsequently, from what I'm told, you know, says what Obenga is saying is right. He says what Obenga is saying is right, but Ehret's position is that there must have been some real, like a deeper African unity. He's not abandoning his language family, okay, of Afrosan. He's not abandoning that to, you know, kind of give deference to Obenga's work. You know, that's the point. But so he's still trying to hold on to that from what I've been told. But you know, this is the major difference, at least between those, you know, two. Now, in terms of the others, you know, they're not willing to accept. Many of them are not willing to accept to be receptive to any comparisons of Egyptian with other African languages. You know, they're not receptive to that. Ehret attempts to do that, you know, systematically. He's, you know, pretty much alone. But many other Egyptologists, they don't even look in the direction of Africa, you know, for comparative analysis in linguistics. It's just not something that they do.
Like, basically, it seems that just from your dissertation or from your presentation that, you know, we've kind of
It seemed like a dissertation.
Yeah. that we've kind of pushed aside the notion that, you know, there was a great influence from the outside that from any outside entities that kind of shape Egypt. You know, which seems to kind of be more or less, you know, not exactly, but indirectly a birthplace for African cultures, you know, to Ethiopia and other places.
Right, and you're making an excellent point. You know, and what you should remember is that in your conversations with people on this question, you should make them aware of the scholarship that in some places is non-African. Now we know all of the, you know, there's Babakar Sall, there is, you know, Abu Bakr Musa Lam. There are many African scholars on the continent that are continuing to work with Cheikh Anta Diop. That's our project, you know, and we're going to continue that. But there are a number of white scholars who are working along a similar line, you know, and in conversations, make sure you make people aware of the diversity of those views, you know, because they will attempt to, you know, try to say that, you know, it's ideological, you know, that it's political, your scholarship is political. But no, it is a research paradigm that Cheikh Anta Diop instituted that has reverberated in the field of Egyptology, you know, and, you know, there are some sectors of Egyptology that are taking it seriously and some that are not, okay, most are not, but you should highlight the ones that are taking Cheikh Anta Diop's work seriously, even if they disagree on some minor points.
And the second part of my statement is that, you know, is there a body of work done to say what the, okay, if there's not a lot coming in, you know, is there a lot going out? Like, because just in my own just real basically just, you know, aesthetic view of it, just, you know, I look at Rome and I see a lot of the same structure in Egypt that predates Rome. Like if you look at the buildings and the way they're shaped, the way the pillars are shaped, and some of the kind of pyramidal kind of buildings, you know, I see that in Rome. Or when you look to, you know, if you look to other like cultures like in Asia, and this is something that I really can't qualify. I just heard it somewhere, and I wonder if you qualify this. You know, I heard that, you know, kind of, you know, when you look at like the Zulu warriors and some of the different, you know, so I was researching something in there, and some of the different fighting styles in Africa, it kind of resembles, you know, some of the, you know, like the one with the monkey and, you know, and some of the different fighting styles in Africa kind of resemble the ones in Asia. So my thing is, okay, if we've proven that, you know, there wasn't this great influence on Egypt, has it been proven that Egypt, a black civilization, was, you know, Africa and holistically, or their influence to the rest of the world? Is research being done to suggest that, you know, from Rome to Asia and things like that? Could you qualify the whole kind of fighting style point?
Okay. Yeah, you know, I want to start. Something came to my mind. Before I even get to this, I want to start with this, is that a few years ago, you know, usually in terms of like what conservative kind of Egyptologist scholars, when they look at a civilization, they usually focus on two factors. They usually focus on writing and technology as the evidence of quote-unquote civilization. With African civilization, I mean, that has to be reworked completely. But in terms of Egypt, in terms of the writing question, you know, once again we get to these outside influences. A traditional theory in scholarly circles was that Mesopotamia diffused the idea of writing to Egypt, and then it developed, you know, because it was seen to have prior, you know, it existed prior in terms of time, supposedly. But there is, and I want you to write this down, okay, there is a German Egyptologist, okay, by the name of Gunther Dreyer, G-U-N-T-H-E-R, Dreyer, D-R-E-Y-E-R. Okay, I want you to remember that name, okay, because Gunther Dreyer found in Egypt, I went to New York to see a major presentation of his, but he found in Egypt, in Abydos, okay, in tombs in Abydos, the evidence of the earliest writing that we know of, you know, the earliest writing. And not only that, folks, okay, because Gunther Dreyer has familiarity with Western Asia also. So he went one step further, and he said that on pottery on pottery, much of the pottery in Mesopotamia, there are symbols that cannot be interpreted in their language. But they are readable from the standpoint of the Egyptian language. I mean, this is pottery over there. It can't be read, in their language, but it's readable from the standpoint of the Egyptian language. His thesis was that, well, perhaps now we're flipping the script. That perhaps there wasn't, and he concluded by saying this. He says, perhaps the diffusion was not from Western Asia or Mesopotamia to Egypt, but it was the other way around. Okay, and this gets into your next question, of the diffusion of Egypt. That is really the inspiration of Egypt. Is far-reaching. You have Martin Bernal's, work on the Black Athena that really kind of, I think, elevated, this debate to a whole new level in terms of, the massiveness of this influence. But you also have this occurring, everyone knows that, and then, what Obinga deals with also is that when you deal with even the Greeks coming into Egypt, the many of the Greek scholars and philosophers that learn, well, there is something called the Loeb Classics, which is what, we all, kind of go to read whatever you want on, the Greek language, culture, philosophy. But there is another corpus of Greek literature called the Scholias. These are things that don't get published in the Loeb Classics. The Scholia, Scholia. These are things that don't get published. Okay, that means you don't have ready access to them. You only are able to penetrate them if you know Greek. So these are, kind of little texts, and Obinga has went through many of these texts. You don't see his work on that in English. You don't see much of his work on this in English. But Obinga went through many of these things, and the deference that Greeks give to Egypt on all levels, when you look at this, it's not just oral, it is a real deference. I mean, you have, Obinga gave a presentation on Plato making a comment in this Scholia, it's called the Scholia Platonica, making a comment that, the Egyptian education system is superior to our educational system because the goal of their educational system is to create human beings. Holistic human beings. So you have Plato saying these things, and if Plato, this is your model, of a philosopher, and here is Plato giving deference to Egypt, and giving deference to the superiority of their educational system in text. And people, we don't even get, the diffusion. People, say all the time, well, we don't have real technical texts on mathematics, or things like this with Egypt. The Rhine mathematical papyrus, is, crude in terms of modern standards of other civilizations that we have texts on. Let's say that you're right. You're not, but let's say that you're right. But how do you build a pyramid? Okay, let's get the text aside and let's look at products. Okay. How do you build a pyramid? How do you do that? What is the type of people don't ask basic questions. What is the type of educational curriculum that you must have to produce that? It's astonishing to the mind. That's why people don't even entertain the question. Text aside, look at what they built. And you can get a sense of the type of educational system that undergirded that.
Because, like, if you go back and you look at all the imperialism that was exerted on Egypt, if they were to see these types of things or these types of evidences, I'm pretty sure they would destroy them. And if they even if we had even if there was things that mathematical skills, because a lot of things in Egyptian culture were, you know, a lot of innovations were shunned because it wasn't in line with their, you know, spiritual beliefs sometimes.
Well, the Egyptians
But
had a
they-
spirit of excellence.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you see. When you look at their toolkit in the Old Kingdom during the Pyramid Age, I mean, it's, you know, when you look at the toolkit, it seems very, very crude, you know. But it's a spirit of excellence. It really is. In terms of their artwork, in terms of their craftsmanship, it is meticulous. And this is why it inspires. This is why it inspired the ancient world.
But like
We can probably take one more question because some of you have to leave, so why don't we get one more question?
Oh, okay.
Harold,
I'm sorry. I can go on for.
And then those of you who have
I
other
can take questions for an
I'll
hour
ask
on this.
Dr.
Go ahead.
Beatty questions after, but we can at least sit for Harold's question real quick.
I wanted to throw a name out again first.
Okay.
As far as that stretch, you might want to look at Dr. Clyde Winter's work in linguistics on the Mondin, Dravidian, Sumerian connection as far as languages and things, as far as that confusion. And he does a lot of work on the African origins of the Chinese civilization, starting with design, sheep, you know, saying civilization, still that side and whatnot, that may be inherited. My question, you know, saying to you is, me and a colleague who's out of London by the name of Ferg Somo,
Ferg Somo.
yeah, have been doing like some, and this is just, you know, it's nothing like too serious, like, you know, like 2% papers with, we just been, he has on, because he's a linguist, you know, but I deal more so with philosophy, symbology, things of that nature. And comparing the various Bantu languages to that of, you know, saying Tamaric, finding a lot of similarity and exactitudes with, let's say, for example, the Kikongo, you know, languages and the philosophies behind their cosmology and cosmographs is found in the everyday, you know, lives of the Egyptians. And, you know, one of the things I don't see too many people dealing with too much is the oral tradition of the modern people in, you know, Central West, you know, and South Africa, because my readings of these people, they all say that they come from the Sahara area, and that their people moved south because of the desertification, you know, of the Sahara when it was, you know, marshland first, and then the whole geography of the natural football period, which before, you know, saying during a period of 10,000 BCE to around 5,000 BCE, was, you know, very capable of holding, you know, saying, a civilization from desertification. And this being the possible reason, you know, saying why it's such similarities going down, because of this desertification pushing the people out of the way. And this is how, in essence, really you see the formation. Because like Diop always talks about civilizations coming together to fight an external, you know, situation, whether it be another nation or whether it be the environment, and possibly looking at that particular reason, you know, saying for the formation, because of the desertification pushing people like, you know, this across Africa. Wants to know like what, you know, particular research is being, you know, done in that area that's on the geography. It's not the grammatical aspect, you know, and you know, the reasons for the formation.
Very good questions.
Those of you have to leave.
Okay, very good questions. In brief, of course, the connection between Egypt and Bantu, that's all Obinga does. Okay, in terms of, I mean, that's his major. I mean, when you are, you know, if you're able to read his work in French, that's his whole thesis. You know, is that there are African scholars like Abu Bakr Musalam, who teaches at the University of Cheikh Anta Diop. He does exactly what you're saying right there. He talks about this desertification as a variable, as a major variable in the dispersion of African populations, you know, in antiquity. That's all he, you know, that's pretty much, that's a large part of what he does, you know, as a scholar. So that work is being done by African scholars. And they do integrate oral traditions in their work. You know, I mean, outside, you know, in English, you know, you have Jan van Sina, you know, Oral Tradition as History. You know, you have these works like this. A lot of times, especially in Central Africa, you know, people don't want to go, you know, to do these things because of the very real issues of political instability and things like that on the ground, things that are happening on the ground that are unstable, that make people less willing, you know, to choose that as a place for field research when you know, chasing bullets, you know. But there is a lot of work, you know, and even, you know, someone like Chancellor Williams, you know, hey, you know, did field research, you know, in Central Africa also. I mean, there is a tradition of it, of, you know, getting these oral types of histories, you know, even in our own, you know, our own work. There's a lot more needed. There's a lot of, like, for example, there's a lot of interesting things in terms of contemporary now. There's a sister, an African American sister named Ann Bailey, and what she did was, in terms of, you know, I'm sure you talk about the slave trade and things like that. But what she did was kind of novel, is that she visited like a number of, you know, African polities along the coast, West African coast, you know, Ghana, Senegal, etc. And because every time you go over there, when you go over to Ghana, you hear these oral traditions coming from chiefs, etc., about the, you know, the slave trade. You hear them coming out, but she collected them. You know, she collected them and she wrote a book, you know, on the slave trade, but based on these oral stories, these oral traditions. And it's published by a major press too. It's just out like about three or four years ago. You know, so you have those, I mean, interesting types of research questions, and that's fascinating. And by no means is that you know, that all that needs to be done, because Ann Bailey, although it's a novel thesis, she really, her work, I mean, it could be extended, you know, even on questions like that.
Is it still true that the Egyptians could manipulate gold in a way that we can't even manipulate it today? Is that still true?
Well, not modern Egyptians. Some of the gold, no, not from some of the gold I see. No, the craftsmanship is not what it was. Okay, but also even in Egypt itself, even in ancient Egypt itself, you have to make a distinction. It's like a distinction when you, like, the craftsmanship that comes out at the capital and the major urban centers like Memphis, like, you know, Unu, Heliopolis, Thebes, etc. When you have a state, when you have the backing of the state and resources, etc., behind your product, trying to make it excellent, the craftsmanship is meticulous. But even in ancient Egypt, you know, when you go out, you know, outside in kind of some of the rural areas, you know, you have craftsmanship, but it's just not on the same level. You know, so, you know, even you have this diversity in Egypt, but the high craftsmanship compared to modern day, no, it ain't no comparison to me. You know, when you just look in any Egyptian art treasures book, you know, and you can make that determination easily. There are many of them.
And I say that to kind of make my point, is that, you know, a lot of these questions about, you know, whether Africa was an indigenous black civilization, it seems to be common sense when you look at the statue and, you know, some of the different things that they were saying, and like, you know, a lot of what they did was oratory.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, it seems to be common sense, but common sense is uncommon when you hold, you know, kind of these, you know, white supremacist kind of racist views. It's not, you know, it seems to be common sense, but they're not, you know, they're not willing to entertain that for obvious reasons.
But Joe, why don't you let somebody talk?
Okay.
Yes, one thing I want to know, every time I go to Ghana, I always hear the narrative that we came from the East, from Egypt, the Akan, the Ashanti especially. So is anybody doing any work on that particular narrative of groups that say that they came from that area who have that part of the oral?
You know, I don't know. You know, I know that there's a work by Eva Meyerowitz, you know, is on Akan in Egypt, you know, kind of the comparative analysis. I know also, Paul, that not necessarily Ghana, but there was a, if you go to the library and you look about, I think about five years ago, but you could look at them all, but you check the African Archaeological Review, that journal, okay, they had a very nice piece on Igbo Ukwu. Not Ghana, but Igbo Ukwu, but they may have some other things, but they are trying to document in terms of archaeology their their oral tradition that they are coming from the East.
Yeah.
You know, they're trying to, because many of the artwork, you know, it looks like, you know, when they're doing the excavations, it looks like what they're saying is true. Okay, so that is one. It was about 5 years ago. That was a very important piece. So, yeah, it was Igbo Ukwu. Yeah, it was on Igbo Ukwu. That's the African Archaeological Review. Now, if you check the whole series, you know, of that, you might find some. They always have interesting articles in that journal.
I know, and I haven't found anybody to give a good critique of his work yet, but Dr. Nana Bachi-Dakwa, who wrote the Africans who wrote the Bible.
Okay, now you enter in a whole nother realm.
You know,
Well, you enter a whole nother realm, but
you know, he's a linguist. You know, and like if you look at his book, you see a lot of pictures and stuff of like the stools. You know what I'm saying, the traditional icon stools, which you find in ancient Egypt. The only difference between the icon stools and the Egyptian stools is the Egyptian stools had a back, while the icon stools don't have a back. But it's the same shape, the same, you know.
well, there. I mean, but that research has been done. Like Babacar Saw, you know, in French, he has a whole book, you know, called "The Cultural Unity of Black Africa," and he only studies one thing: is that. He gives pictures. You know, all you see is images of those images from different African cultures. You know, so these things are not just being studied from, you know, this angle. You know, I thought you were going to religion and the Bible with that, but yeah, you're sticking on the cultural question. Okay, all right, you're sticking on that question. Oh yeah, you're sticking on the cultural question. That's easy to answer because that work is being done. All you have to do. I mean, if you learn French on a basic level, you will learn a lot. Okay, about this, you have to. I mean, eventually, that's a way you have to go because it'll open up a new world for you. Because they are absolutely at one time with, you know, Ivan Van Sertima right there. I mean, we were like almost ahead, you know. But somehow we need to recapture, you know, that also. It's coming back. You know, we're coming back, especially with Obinga over here. But they're just doing great work over there. But of course, they're there. You know, they have the benefit of being in Senegal in these places, and it makes their connection. It makes the connection between those African civilizations and Egypt much stronger in their writing. But that work is being done.
Side question in a sense. The whole concept of what we call, you know, plant. And its particular location. I know somebody has, you know, personally me, just reading the work, it seems like, you know, the T, you know, at the end of the words is really pretty much kind of silent. To me, kind of like the feminine in lay, you know, you do LES, S, you know, you say lay, but when it's written, you put the S. It seems to be the same way with the feminine aspect of the T and the metanetra. What is your opinion on the concept of the word punt actually being the word by into? Because of the P's, you know, saying that the B's almost being
the B, right.
The exchange and you know, saying the whole concept of the T being silent. You know, like is that a possibility given the nature of like what all of the people were saying in the region being
I need a chalkboard. Sorry. That's the first question is, so for example, if I give you, I mean, you're on the first question, you're right. So if I give you something like if I give you a basic word like this, Sinet, sister, or your word, let's say, I didn't write that right. It's usually here. Yeah, it's usually here. the first thing is that the T in the Egyptian language, the T is at the end of words of all geographical areas. So any geographical name, pretty much you're going to see a T at the end. The T is what makes a word feminine, okay, in the Egyptian language. Your second point is well taken, is that you're right that the T can often be dropped, okay, or can be silent, and we know this technically through Coptic, which is the last phase of the Egyptian language, meaning that if you want to learn, we have to use this kind of arbitrary transliteration system, because Egyptologists didn't want you to have to learn two languages as opposed to one. Okay, if you learn Coptic before you learn Middle Egyptian, then you would get a clearer sense of how the Egyptian language probably sounded. Okay, but so for example, this, and this is with many Egyptian words that end in T. You can do this. There are many. You can do long series of words. But in Coptic, Senet. This is sister in Coptic. Sone. Sone. And from that, you can see your principle, taking shape in the Egyptian language. That you're right. The T is often dropped. The sounds, is silent in many, many words. Even not just in Coptic, but even in late Egyptian. Now, the other thing, of, kind of comparing B and P. This is a, this is a comparison that's done all the time, and that's an accurate comparison between those two sounds, with each other. Now, I would have to know a little bit more, about the specifics, of the words, that you use, the history of the word, because it is a principle that Obinga, tries to go by when he analyzes words, okay, and he compares. Phonetics, semantics, sound and meaning together. So, for example, if you have the same phoneme or the same string of consonants, that you're attaching to this. If you see, if you see this in Egyptian, and if you see something else that's similar without a T in Bantu, etc., in terms of sound, and it means the same thing, okay? If you see that same string of consonants with the same sound that means the same thing, then that is evidence of the non-accidental genetic relationship between those languages. That's Obinga's, that is, what he does. That is, in short, I'm torturing it. It's very complex, but in short, that's what he does. He looks at sound and meaning of phonemes. And of course, you can make these types of interchanges. Okay.
While you're right here, could you show us what Dr. Obinga did with Philosophia that when he upset anybody?
How much time do we have?
Oh, this is
Okay. Okay. Okay.
go to like
Okay.
1:30, 40.
Okay.
These folks just want to ask questions.
Okay.
Class is gone.
Okay. Okay.
Good few people from class.
Essentially, Obinga's theory is that sophos, this word in Greek is, means wisdom. But Obinga asks a basic question, that you ask of all words. And Obinga asks the question of, well, what is the etymology of this word? What is the etymology that Greeks give? Or, the scholars writing on the Greek language, what is the etymology that they give to this word? And in all of the dictionaries that he checked, there is no etymology given for sophos, okay, in their language. And so Obinga asks a question, well, could it be that it came from somewhere else? Okay.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
I don't want to say anything that was like.
Well, okay. I think, as I tell my students in my class, you can say what you want to say, just be respectful of how the words you use. So if you like to make your point, I'd appreciate it if it's okay if you don't. Or I can fill in the blanks for you. Okay. All right. But I think your point is well respected and accounted for. I think, is it true, like, I'm somebody in college, you know, I was at the Million Man March. That was something, like, we had to go to. Like, and when I was on the Black Student Union, if you didn't go to the Million Man March, you was, like, not black enough. You know what I'm saying? So we was on the bus. Get on the bus and go. Well, what role does that mean, right? And, of course, the Brothers in the Nation are espousing an ideology that is emphasizing a lot of different things. And how would that play out? I think it would be fascinating. First, we'd have to really systematically study the Brothers in the Nation. We'd have to get into the organization to really get a picture of what's happening. But I think there would be some very interesting effects. Clearly, the black Muslims and folks that claim a Christian identity are espousing some very different ideologies. So,
Do you think that's picked up in your other faiths very well?
I think it could be. Yeah.